Firstly, if I can acknowledge that this event today is brought to you by the Global Heart Hub. And I just want to tell you a little bit about, let me just move my slides here. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. First of all, my name is Neil Johnson. I run an Irish heart and stroke charity. We're based in Galway, west coast of Ireland, the true capital of Ireland, really. So for anyone that's from Dublin on the line, please don't get too excited about that. It's something you can look forward to, visiting the capital at some stage in the future if you haven't already. And I'm also a member of the board of the Global Heart Hub. And I guess my apportioned responsibility in that regard is for development and strategy. I'll be talking to you a little bit about the Global Heart Hub in a second. And I also want to, at the outset, acknowledge that getting some feedback there. I want to acknowledge that we have support from Novartis, Boehringer Ingelheim, Lilly Alliance, Servier, Vifor Pharma, and we've given representatives from those companies the opportunity to sit on the call as observers today. So if you're out there, we welcome you and thank you for your support. The vast majority of the people on the call should be aware of the Global Heart Hub, but I'm aware that we do have a number of people who've reached out to us. They heard through various channels of today's event, and we're delighted to welcome them. They're from different disease areas, some related to the work that we're doing. So a special welcome to those from the diabetes community, from the obesity community. But we do also have some other disease communities represented from the point of view of patient organizations. So we're delighted to have you on board. So the background to this, before I tell you a little bit about the Global Hub, is that today we were to have the start of a two-day event in Galway, primarily as an event for the patient organizations affiliated to the Global Heart Hub. And it was to have been our first attempt to look at capacity building in advocacy for patient organizations. And obviously due to COVID, that had to be postponed. So what we have today, in effect, are three of the presenters who were due to present at that two-day event. And they're all from Ireland, as it so happens. But we see this now as the start of a series of engagements led by the Global Hub, Global Heart Hub, on advocacy, upskilling, and advocacy training. So today is very much an introductory session, and we've purposely designed it as such. So for those of you who perhaps are more experienced in advocacy, some of this might be very basic to you. We ask you to bear with us and indulge us, because over the series of events that we plan over the coming months, we will be obviously upping our game and engaging international speakers and looking at best practice examples of advocacy in the patient community. But just very quickly in relation to the Global Hub, the Global Heart Hub is a relatively new entity. Its origins go back about 5 years. It came about when a group of 7 of us from 7 different organizations and from 7 different countries, patient organizations, came together to address the issue of heart failure, which is a specific cardiac disease. And over a period of time, we came to realize a number of things. The most striking being that for some reason or other, despite the scale of cardiovascular disease, the patient voice is neither organized or structured, and is actually at a local, regional, international level missing a platform for that voice, unlike most other disease areas where the patient community is very well organized. Those of you in the heart community, of course, will be aware of how well organized disease areas like diabetes, cancer, MS, CF, they have a long history of being organized as patient organizations. So the Global Hub was formally launched, effectively rebranded from its original identity, which was the International Heart Hub, was formally launched this year. And we have just under 60 heart patient organizations now affiliated to the hub. And our whole raison d'etre and purpose in life is patient and carer advocacy. We want to create a platform, which is the hub, to unite heart patient organizations across the world. We want to organize and amplify the patient and carer voice as true stakeholders in healthcare systems, and of course in their personal healthcare. We want to build patient organization capacity for advocacy, and today's event is the start of a journey in this regard. And ultimately, we want to contribute to improved self-care, self-management through empowerment, with the ultimate objective being better outcomes for patients and, of course, their carers. Currently, we're funded entirely from grants that we approach industry for. We do that on the basis that industry obviously are also stakeholders in the cardiovascular world. And that way in which we interface with industry is very transparent, very ethical, and we have very clear guidelines as to how we will work with industry. And as we grow, we hope that in time we will be able to secure funding through traditional philanthropic routes. So we're a new entity. We want to create an international alliance, and we believe there's a strength in an international alliance. And we want to strive to achieve representation on a European and global platform for patients living with, or individuals living with or affected by cardiovascular disease. And so to today, I'm really delighted that we have 3 speakers today who come with 3 different experiences of advocacy. These 3 speakers, as I said, were due to be with us at a face-to-face event in Galway, which has been postponed. And our first speaker today is a lady by the name of Avril Easton. And Avril is Advocacy Manager with the Alzheimer's Society of Ireland. And she's been in that role, I believe, since January of 2009. But she has worked in a number of different roles in the advocacy, dementia sphere. She has Irish and European experience in patient advocacy. And we've asked her to, if you like, start at the very beginning and talk to us about what is patient advocacy and why should patients be advocates and what's it all about. So I'm going to hand over to Avril now, and her time slot runs to 15:30, and during that period of time she's going to speak to us and she's going to take some questions. And in that context, I just want to very quickly, before we formally hand over to Avril, just talk about some of the ground rules of the protocol for today's meeting. So because we have a very large number on the call, I would ask that everybody stays on mute while the speakers are presenting. This reduces interference and also, I think, protects the integrity of the meeting. You can use your raised hand option, which I believe is at the bottom of your screen. And I'm trying to think, does that come under, Maureen, can you hear me there? Where does one find the raised hand?
So if you just open the participants tab, there's a raise hand just on the corner there, the bottom corner.
Okay, perfect. So you can raise your hand there, and we will be taking note of who has raised a hand and asked a question, and we'll go to questions at the appropriate time. And if you are speaking or asking a question, that you will turn on your video, and then we would ask you to speak slowly and clearly, probably more slowly and clearly than I'm speaking. And that's because we have people from different countries and different language backgrounds where English is not their first language. So we'd ask you to avoid acronyms, which make it difficult for others to understand you. And my task today is to keep to the time schedule. And to do that, I would suggest that in addition to raising your hand, or alternatively to raising your hand, you can submit questions through the chat channel. And there's likely to be some common threads on questions. So for time efficiency, some of these questions will be pooled together if we have time and addressed accordingly. So that's my input for now. And I'm going to hand you over to Avril. So Avril, will you, wow, it's just a full screen of pictures in front of me here.
Hi there, everyone. I don't know if you can hear me, see me. I can
Hi,
still.
Avril. Good to see you.
I can see Neil, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to share my screen. So hopefully this works. Great.
Very good.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Like Neil said, this is new, so it's different, but it's a great opportunity for me and for those that I have worked with over the years to outline a little bit about what we've done and how we've done it, and tell you a little bit about why patient advocacy is important and why it matters. I will try and speak slowly. It's a challenge, but hopefully I'll get there and you can all follow. So patient advocacy, what is it and why? I have worked, as Neil said, with the Alzheimer's Society of Ireland, and this is very much drawing on my experiences working with people with dementia, the patients themselves. We always refer to them as people and not patients, but in this presentation, I'll refer to them as patients. And what I'd like to do is just draw on some of our experiences to give you a backdrop on how it can work. But I think it's really important to say at the outset, this information, although it's about people living with dementia, it has applicability. It applies to all of us, and to anybody that is facing challenges around getting their voice heard and highlighting the challenges they're facing with whatever their condition may be. So I think that's important. So what I'll do in the presentation is I'll give you a brief overview about advocacy. The first challenge is always saying the word advocacy. It's a tricky one. And then, like I say, I'll give you a little bit of an example of work that we've done with the Irish Dementia Working Group. And then what I'd like to do is outline some of the learnings that we have had from our own advocacy work. It's not scientific. It's very much taken from my own personal reflections, from speaking to colleagues and from speaking to those that we work with. What makes advocacy work and what are some of the key lessons? And then most critically, to kind of finish off, I would like to just outline why the patient voice matters. I hope that'll become clear throughout the presentation, but we'll reinforce that at the end. So the word advocacy, it's a Latin word of origin, and it means to add voice. To advocate is to add voice of support to a cause or a person. When I looked this up, I found a number of different ways that advocacy was explained or defined, and these were the ones that resonated with the work that I understood and that I was going to talk to you today about. So advocacy is taking action to secure your rights, represent your interests, and obtain the services you need. And critically, I think the thing is taking action. For me, advocacy is about action and it's about change. Like I say, I suppose today we'll be talking about self-advocacy, where the person themselves recognizes an issue and wants to tackle it themselves. But there's many different types of advocacy. There's the self-advocacy, there's peer advocacy, and there's in the world of dementia, we often have non-instructed advocacy or instructed advocacy, where an advocate will take action on behalf of a person. Today, like I say, I'm talking mostly about work that is done by people affected themselves on behalf of those that also are affected by a condition. This is the group that I'll be mainly referring to. It's a diverse group of people first and foremost. They have one thing in common, and that happens to be a diagnosis of dementia. So all those people that you see there in front of you are living with dementia. And you'll hear and see from them later in the presentation But just when I was referring to the Irish Dementia Working Group, I wanted you to have a visual of that. The reason I included this evolution of the group, for me, when I thought about this, the most important thing that people understand about this work is that it takes time, a lot of time. It's very time consuming, and the work doesn't happen overnight. So, you know, if people are committed to this, you need to be there for, you know, the long game would be my thing on it. I was employed by the Alzheimer's Society in 2009. I was given one directive, one action, one key outcome, and that was to create a group that could give patients, people with dementia, a voice. It only took me 4 years to reach my key performance indicator. So, you know, that's kind of unusual that they kept me in the job. But it just shows this work did not happen overnight, and it really did take a lot of time to develop. So we launched the group in 2013, and over the years, I suppose the structure was what we evolved. We elected a chair, which was very important, because otherwise it would have been just me, let's say, and my colleagues directing the work. The election of a chair for the group was really important because it meant the work was now driven by a person themselves. The work started to increase, and when I say the work, I mean that they took part in many advocacy pieces of political advocacy, media awareness, and I'll show you some examples of that later in the presentation. Terms of reference, for those of you that are part of a patient advocacy group, these are really dull, but so important. There is so many times that we have had to refer back to a terms of reference. I understand a terms of reference to be how we operate, what you can expect from the patient organization that I represent, and what we expect of you, the patient. So it just sets out, I suppose, how often we'll meet, how chair will be elected, how a steering group will be elected. Really important points of consideration about how we present ourselves, how we agree on work, how we agree on priorities, and that kind of stuff. So in terms of reference, it's really necessary, really dull, but really, really important. Some people get it. I really kind of flourished on developing a terms of reference. For other people, it's not so, you know, exciting. So kind of find somebody that, you know, that is their interest, and work with them on getting whatever you want to term it, but we called it a terms of reference. Then we started to evolve the group in terms of regional growth, which was really important. Neil referenced Galway at the start of the group, or the presentation there. We tend in Ireland, and I'm sure in other countries, to be very centric around the capital of the country. It's really important that there is regional representation, and that was something, again, that we had to grow and evolve to. Like I say, we have a steering group, and again, it was very important that as the group evolved, that they were elected by their peers, by the fellow members. And I suppose last year we had the really exciting event where we had a first national meeting. We're not a big country in Ireland, however, it's still really difficult, and I can only begin to imagine the challenges of getting a group of people together when you're in a very big country. It was still really hard in Ireland, and you can travel to most places within 3 to 4 hours. So I suppose it's really important, though, to bring people together from the different parts of the country to meet each other, to have a social aspect, but also that feeling of unity together. The difficulties, I just wanted to briefly touch on this, because for me, the difficulties that I'm to outline here in reference to people living with dementia are not dissimilar to any sort of stigma and misunderstanding that other disease conditions face. And I think it forms a very important part of the work that people in patient advocacy must firstly, you know, aim to address. And that is a lack of understanding and awareness of the symptoms that they may face. Like I say, in this instance, it's dementia. I think dementia, although we like to think it's unique, I doubt it probably is. There is a massive stigma associated with dementia. I don't need to go into the reasons for that. I'm sure you can appreciate what they are. But Also, people are underestimated, particularly when they are given a diagnosis. They're written off, and they don't have capacity, as the world and I suppose a society would expect. And the working group set out to change that. We struggle with diagnosis. I don't know if that's something other disease conditions here will relate to, but getting a timely diagnosis is critical in terms of supporting and enabling a person. We also have, I think, something again that probably is quite unique to dementia. People don't get told their diagnosis. Their wife, their husband, their son, their daughter may be told, but there's a culture of creating a fear and anxiety in a person in telling them themselves. And for me, that's always been a very wrong and something very challenging that we have to address. Post-diagnosis, like I say, you go into a waiting room to see a doctor, you're given a diagnosis, you went in with a name and you leave just being the person with Alzheimer's. So again, those stigma and the loss of identity of the person is very, very challenging for them. It's a massive diagnosis to be given, as is, I'm sure, many of the diagnoses that people on the webinar today have received. And like I say, again, there's an alienation in the community due to a lack of understanding predominantly, but a fear around change behaviour and what people understand and the stereotypes that exist. So I suppose all of those would form where the aims and objectives for the group have come from. And it's very much to be that voice. It's to influence public policy. It's to get involved in public policy and to set the policy and research agenda, which is something that we're finding more now with what's called public patient involvement. So people aren't just involved in the research, they're setting the research questions. So that's been really exciting as a development. And then, like I say, a really critical part, and it's been so invaluable in terms of shaping the landscape that we work in around developing and promoting information, awareness, education to those that are working directly with people with dementia. And I think if there's one area maybe that you wanted to focus on in early years, it's maybe that, because changing those perceptions really has it infiltrates so many areas. And then I suppose by people being seen in the public's awareness, it reduces that prejudice that they have and the stigma associated. So it can be tricky, and I will show you some examples here. We had in 2000, I can't remember what it was, 2011, is that correct? The Forgotten Lives. That was, what would you say, a very important documentary program that, as the name suggests, investigates certain areas. In this instance, it investigated forgotten lives, people with dementia. But the gentleman on my right is, he was former Minister for Finance. His wife had Alzheimer's, and he went on this program at that time to say he had kind of disappeared from politics and people had wondered why. And it was because he was caring for his wife. And in 2011, he did this interview to talk about his experiences, but he also, it was quite a particular line that he drew under those experiences. He wanted to get back into politics and he wanted to explain his absence. But the impact that his story been told had was seismic. The number of calls that we received, it was just phenomenal. From one documentary, 1 hour on television, it was quite seismic. Then we had the opportunity to influence the National Dementia Strategy. And again, I'm sure in Ireland we have very popular creating strategies. The implementation is more challenging, but having the voice of the patient involved in those strategies is really, really critical. And for me, they don't hold any value unless they have the patient voice involved in strategies. The National Dementia Summit, that was in 2011. And again, it was one opportunity for carers and people with dementia to visit the Houses of Parliament in Ireland. And for them, for many of them, I would say for most of them, it was the first time they felt their voice, their experience was being valued and listened to by the powers that be, those that govern the country. And then we started with our awareness campaigns. I suppose The caveat with awareness campaigns is they cost money. So to be very aware of that when you want to do something that's, you know, on the back of buses, on train stations, on TV advertisements, there is money required. But there's other ways, you know, there will be TV shows that I'm sure if there is somebody that you can work with to pitch your story and how you tell your story, that can often be a very, very effective way of raising awareness and highlighting issues. Neil also alluded to the European group. That was a really massive, I suppose, addition to the work that we had done, because the work was in many countries, we did it in our own way, and we didn't necessarily share or understand what was happening in other places. So when the Alzheimer Europe developed the first meeting and brought people with dementia from many different European countries, there was massive learning. It brought massive hope. People got to travel and meet each other and understand and learn about their experiences, the experiences they were having in other countries. And it was really, really powerful, and it still is a very powerful group. And for the, you know, for let's say pharmaceutical country or companies or the likes of the European Parliament, this is a great resource for them to be able to tap into when deciding research or discussing policy. The European Working Group would be someone they would call on, a group they would call on. And then there's the political advocacy, which I can talk a little bit more about later on. This is just one example of something that worked really well in terms of reaching out to the public. You may have heard of TED Talks. We came up with the idea of having Alz Talks. So this was, these are a selection of the images of people with dementia telling their story, their experience through Alz Talks. And what we did was we brought it to theatres around Ireland. We invited the public in, and we made it an evening of entertainment, because not dissimilar to a presentation like this, they can be a little bit dull and kind of stagnant. We wanted to make this vibrant and entertaining. Again, a really, they were amazing nights to be part of, because it reframed how people discussed and thought about the issue. So here's a little bit about an overview of what I'm going to talk about in terms of what we've learned from our advocacy work. And I hope that some of them will be helpful and be applicable to you guys. Like I say, they're not scientific, they're just my thoughts and my reflections that I've had with the people we've worked with and the teams that I've worked with. So for me, I must explain this picture. That is our president on the left, Michael D. Higgins. He had just been placed in office at that stage. And the other gentleman beside me is a gentleman called Dermod Slevin. The photo was taken, and as soon as the photo was taken, I realized I wasn't supposed to be in it. But there wasn't a chance I wasn't getting in for a picture with the president. And that Christmas, you can see it was taken at Christmas time. That year, my parents had the picture up everywhere in the house when all the guests arrived. So it's a really proud moment that I wasn't actually meant to be part of, but it was to acknowledge and celebrate Dermot's contribution to the Alzheimer's Society. We were marking 30 years of the organisation. Dermot was an extraordinary man. He was diagnosed with Lewy body dementia, which is another particular type of dementia. But he was as humble and softly spoken a man as you will ever meet. But I identify him as our champion for people living with dementia. He had no fear about saying what his diagnosis was. He wanted to break down the stigma that was associated with it. And for us, he meant that in our work, we could gather momentum, because he gave us, I suppose the word is trust. People trusted us when they knew Dermot was involved. It was reputable. We weren't just talking about what we would like to do as an organisation. And he really was such a champion for the people impacted by the condition. So if I was to say one thing to you, identify a champion. You will find champions they're hard to find, but when they are found, they're like gold dust. They really are critical. I also think it's important to differentiate between a champion and a leader. We had subsequent leaders of the group who took on very different roles. They wanted the group to evolve, to become stronger. They took on the chair role, which isn't for everyone. And but Dermot was that face and that champion that just set him. He said, no, I want to talk about this. I want to highlight this. And it's really important. I think the work starts with that champion. So I said it at the start, and I'll say it again, and I'll probably say it again a few more times after this. There is no magic bullet for this work. There is absolutely, time is needed. I think for people to develop an understanding of each other, you need to build in time for social interaction. The facilitator of the group is such an essential part of making the group work and holding the members of the patient advocacy group together. The patients must trust their facilitator. They must believe that the facilitator can deliver on their needs, must understand their needs. So I would really say, find a facilitator or an organization or whatever it might be that you can trust and work together with. Always asking the people involved. And in my presentation, I was getting confused myself when I was writing it, because at some point I'm speaking to the patient advocate, the person, and at other times I'm going to speak to the organization and those that have responsibility for this work. So pardon, my apologies for that. But for the people that are organizing these groups and organizing these patients to have their voice, you need to communicate. You need to take time to communicate with them. You need to get to know the person. You need to get to know who they are, how they work, what their interests are, and how they want to work, because that will really reap benefits for you in any future interactions you will have. One of the things that's, again, not so trendy or ever really spoken about, there is a lot of work that goes in behind the scenes to all of this. I wrote down some of the things that, in 10 seconds, how many can you name? And, we book venues, we book taxis, we book hotels, we set agendas, we meet people before the meeting, during the meeting, after the meeting. We give support writing speeches. We give support with phone calls in advance, during an event. There's so many emails. There is a lot of contact needed. But that makes the group stronger and it makes the advocate more effective. And it's really important that you take that time to build people's confidence, but not just their confidence, also their capacity to undertake the work. And I'll talk about that a little bit more as well. And yeah, always involving people at the outset. That will be so important, because if you just bring something ready-made to a patient advocacy group, then it's not meaningful. It hasn't had their voice, it hasn't had their contributions. Sorry, I got a fright there when I saw my own face coming up immediately. So this is just a more recent example. For those of you that have not used Zoom or ever heard the word Zoom before in Ireland, it was probably mid-March. It's been a whole new world for all of us to learn about. But this is just a screenshot of a meeting we had with a very prominent political, a leader of a political party. For those of you who may or may not be interested, it was the president of Sinn Féin. So she's the lady in the middle row. And she, the working group reached out to her to highlight their concern about the lack of discussion or visibility of dementia in the whole COVID-19 discussion. So she availed of she took up the invitation and offered to meet with us. And again, was kind of, she said, oh, well, we can meet after this is all the restrictions are gone and we can all meet in person. And my colleague Clodagh, who's in the top left corner, my rights and left are awful, in the top left corner, she said, no, we have, the members have the capacity to meet with you online if you're willing to do that. In advance of this call, there must have been hours we spent upskilling ourselves in technology and how to do all this crazy Zoom. And is it a verb now? I don't know. I think it might be. but upskilling ourselves, but more importantly, supporting the members of the working group to do this. So if there is anything positive about this whole horrific situation, it is that connectivity. It's great to see so many people online today. So you're able to get online, reach out to the politicians. It doesn't have to be a 4-week schedule of a meeting. They're now much more accessible. And in my short experience of this whole situation, they seem to be wanting to make themselves more available. But yeah, prep yourself again. Make sure you are comfortable so that on the day with the meeting, all you have to worry about is, are you being listened to and what you're going to say? But yes, capacity building, this is a new one for us, understanding the world of kind of webinars and contributions online. Setting realistic and achievable goals. This is probably one of the more challenging things to do. We all have goals in our life, in our work, and achieving them is the hardest part. But actually setting down, what do I absolutely want to do this year or in the next 3 months? I think make them achievable. You know, I've said there, don't spread yourself too thin. I think this is really, really dangerous because you will feel like you're never achieving anything and you never stop at the same time. So be clear about who you want to meet, who you want to get to, and what your priorities are. And then equally, I think it's so important that you celebrate every step on the journey. So, you know, after that meeting that we had online with that political leader, we were so excited because, you know, you could argue, will anything change and will anything, but what was more important was the capacity to deliver that meeting, get the message across, and have that politician take away those messages. So really celebrating just those small achievements is really important, because the big ones will come then, but marking and celebrating every small step that you take along the way, because it can be really difficult. You can be really hard on yourself, wondering, what have I done? What have I achieved? What has changed? It can be, you know, it can be a little bit soul destroying at times. And that's why I suppose I would say to any patient advocate, you must be bold. I work for an organization that tries to support people such as those in this picture to have a voice. But I can't say the things that they can say because I am not living with dementia. The people in this picture, many of them are. They must be the ones that need to be brave and to be bold. But more importantly, and I hope this people understand when I say this, their experiences, your experiences, has an amazing currency. Your voice is a real value. It is really hard to ignore. I can speak forever and a day, but when somebody with the patient experience stands up for 2 minutes, that's who the people will remember, and I assure you of that. So, you know, when I say be bold, this is when we reached out to the lady in the blue jacket is, I think she's still the UN Commissioner for Human Rights, Mary Robinson. She also happened, you'd think I have a thing for presidents, but she also happened to be a former president of Ireland, but a really well-respected lady. And she launched on this occasion a Charter of Rights for people with dementia because her passion has always been human rights. I think it's really important to know that activism, it can bring so many new things, particularly new friendships, new confidence, new skills, new meaning to your life. So I would say embrace the opportunities. If they come your way, it's so much easier to kind of just say, oh, I don't know about that. But unless it really is not for you, say yes and just see where it takes you. And for me, working with people, my biggest fear was always that I would upset or offend somebody by just asking them. So what I had to learn to talk to myself was to say, don't be afraid to ask. The worst someone will say is no, and that's okay too. So kind of let down the guard and be bold. This one is a picture that we took outside the Parliament in Ireland, and it represents a petition. So we got 25,137 signatures. And we were calling on the government to invest in dementia care in that year's budget. And we got 25,000 plus people to say, yes, we support you. Yes, this should happen. The lady with the glasses in the red and her son beside her, they did a video and they really, I suppose, fronted the campaign, and they made the pleas that, you know, you must invest now for my future, for my son's future. I termed this slide Manage Expectations because we did everything for that campaign. We got 25,000 signatures, a really successful campaign. But unfortunately, the budget delivered no investment for people with dementia at that time. And for the lady and her son who fronted that campaign, they were absolutely devastated by this because they felt that they had let down 25,000 plus people by being their voice and not delivering what they needed. And for me and the organization I work with, it was such a learning for me, because we do this work because we must do this work. We must raise awareness, we must lobby, we must campaign. Sometimes the outcomes aren't what you want, but the process is as important as the outcome. But we never explained that to the person who was front and center of that campaign, and they were so upset that they did not deliver what they had, what they were calling for. So for those of you that are going to undertake this work, know that your expectations may be high, but that they need to be managed. And for those working with patient advocates, always understand and explain how expectations need to be managed and understood, because disappointment is not a nice place to be, and to feel and really feel somebody's disappointment was very, very difficult. So that would be one thing I would say, but absolutely celebrate the achievement. We got 25,000 people who may not have been aware that we were lobbying the government, who may not have been aware of dementia, who may not have been aware about the needs for investment. We got them on our side, and we continue to use a large number of that body of people in our campaigns. So like I say, I felt this was an amazing campaign. I was thrilled. I was like, this is amazing. We did brilliant. For the person themselves, they felt they let everyone down. And that was a mistake on our part. That was we should have been more careful about managing expectations. So ensure the work is sustainable. This work is not easy. I think it's really, God, I feel like I've ended on the kind of the bad stuff, so to speak, but people do suffer burnout. Advocates, you are asked to give a part of who you are, a part of your life, a difficult part of your life in many instances, something that may not be understood. And of course, you may have to face criticism or unexpected challenges in that. So been really conscious about the vulnerability that this can bring. I mentioned there, it can also bring financial cost. We would try to reimburse our advocates as much as possible, but they take, in many instances, they have taken on the burden of personal financial cost in some instances. Many times it will bring ill health because there's a lot of work to it. There may be travel. Maybe you get to spend less time with your family, all these things. I think it's just really important that those things are acknowledged. I do say though, alongside all that, the advocates that we work with, the sense of achievement and belonging that they have is very, very strong. They truly believe that they get back as much as they get back as much as they put in, which is an awful lot. And then I suppose finally on this point, don't let the advocacy, the patient experience, don't let it become your life. There's so many more aspects of your life, so don't let it take over. So is that where I am? Oh yeah, I don't know what happened to 8. That's I'm sure it's in the ether of my brain somewhere. But what I'm going to do is this slide, I wanted to show you a little bit about the voice of the people that I've been describing. Hopefully, this is where I'm going to stop the share, and I'm going to show you a short 3-minute video with their, they'll tell you a little bit more about the group.
So Avril, we're going to video, is that it?
Yes, hopefully.
Okay, well, we've got some questions for you, and I'm conscious of time, so we'll look at the video if it's there, and if you're having any difficulty, we'll go to questions.
Can you see that?
No.
Okay. No, okay, so I didn't click share screen. No. No, okay, so, and I'm going to click this because Maureen told me. No.
Okay.
I can get rid of that whiteboard. Oh.
While you're trying to,
hopefully this will, is that working?
No.
Okay.
No. Okay, don't worry. Listen, rather than
yeah.
Oh, hang on. We have something.
Oh.
But
okay.
Yeah, we're going. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for your patience.
I joined the Irish Dementia Working Group 5 years ago, and at that stage dementia was pretty much hidden, and so we're working very hard to bring it out of the shadows and to be able to speak about it.
I discovered the Irish Dementia Working Group, and it was just a complete new world for me. It has helped me to get my message out. I do stuff on the TV and all kinds of things now. It showed me that I could still be who I am, despite the fact that I have a disability.
The Irish Dementia Working Group is extremely important to us in the Alzheimer's Society because it is the authentic voice of people who have dementia or Alzheimer's. They live every day with this, so it's extremely important for us that we're able to relay that back in our lobbying and our advocacy work, because that is the authentic voice, and that everything that we do is influenced by their experiences of daily living.
It's a lift in my life to be meeting such nice people and got to know all these people with a smile on their face every time we meet.
I think before I came here I was very down. You know, you wouldn't be telling anyone, be hiding it. But coming here to all the meetings, it's just brilliant. It's a new lease of life for anyone who has dementia, because they understand.
It's important to have new voices in order to maintain the momentum of engagement, improving the range of communication and exchange between people with dementia, people dealing with people with dementia. And I think this is just a great opportunity to acknowledge and celebrate that.
I'm meeting with people who have similar problems. If you try to hide it, then it's not fair to your friends and family, and it's difficult for you. I think that's the way forward.
I'm finding that other people are in the same boat as myself, and that the forgetfulness I am having is not because I've gone dotty, but because it is a medical condition, and that it can be corrected and assisted and so forth. Simple as that.
This event is really the culmination of the work begun by the Alzheimer's Society of Ireland in 2013, when the organisation took a really clear decision to amplify the voice of people living with dementia. Without the work that has been happening throughout these last 6 years, what's happening here behind me, all these focus groups, people having their voice heard, it just wouldn't happen.
It's really exciting to see all we've achieved, and you know, it's a long way from Kentucky to the big smoke, but here we are sharing our stories and influencing change.
Fantastic. Avril, can I firstly say, I'm obviously biased in this. I think that that was an excellent presentation. And thank you so much, because what I think you did there was you took us on a journey. And everybody on the call, currently 52 people on this call, are on a similar journey, some of us at different stages. I've certainly come away from your presentation with a lot of ideas and I guess a high level of motivation to try and achieve in the Global Hub what you guys have achieved in your organization. So super well done. Thank you for that. Now, questions, because I'm conscious we have a next speaker up in a few minutes. First question coming in from Argentina, would you believe? And
that's a first.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And this is from Ignacio, and he compliments the speaker. But a very important question. How often do you review your advocacy goals? And I think that's relevant in the context of this journey. Obviously, you have set goals, you achieve them, you're measuring so forth. Do you have any, and I'll have to say, quick comment on this because I have a number of questions I'd like to put to you.
Yeah, no, I think the goals, I think it's extremely challenging. We technically review them once a year, but I suppose the overall goals really, they remain the same all the time because there's always work to be done on them. Yeah, and we often get led off track by opportunities, you know, such as what we're in now. Who'd have anticipated that we haven't, yeah. So at least once a year, but probably not as rigorously as we could and should.
I suppose the key message here is that advocacy goals have to be reviewed in at some level of frequency, and you probably have short, medium, and long term, and you can tick them accordingly.
Yeah.
And John from Canada, and I guess I understand where he's coming from with this question, because you talk about patients being bold and speak up. How do you encourage patients to be bold and speak up? And I suspect, and I could be wrong, what he's aiming at there is, how do you engage people in the advocacy mission? How do you get them to join your group, to be active? Quick answer on that one.
Well, I think the voice of the person themselves is the strongest thing they have, and don't be afraid to use it. We as kind of organizers or organizations have to censor ourselves because we have, you know, all sorts of other dilemmas and commitments, but the patient advocate shouldn't have to. I think discuss it with someone you trust about what you want to say and how you want to get that message across. And you know, be clear, but be affirmative in what the message is that you want to put across. It may not be appropriate for, you know, every audience, so be clear about who your audience is and what you're trying to say, and get support and check in with people, but don't be afraid to say what you need to say. Let the organizations worry about that. And
in the context of perhaps, and I could be wrong, I'm suspecting, because I've discussed this with John before, the recruitment of advocates. How do you get people with lived experience come on board to join you on the mission?
Yeah, that like I said, when I said at the outset, it took me 4 years to find anybody. Yeah. I think having a face and a name, like I mentioned Dermot, to rally the troops, so to speak, but we can never give up and become complacent about the number of people that we have engaging with us. We have, I suppose we check in with, you know, memory clinics, so diagnostic clinics were a great source for us, and then those that are working day to day around improving people's lives. So we have, you know, we call them dementia advisors. Again, they're really critical. But I suppose more and more with the social media world, people are contacting us for the first time. But I always say, I think it's a failure of us as an organization. We do not find people, they often have to find us. And that makes me sad. It is still an ongoing challenge that people don't know about us and don't hear about us until it comes to their door. So yeah, you should never become complacent, basically. Keep looking, keep searching, but they're out there, the people are out there.
Yeah. And I can verify that we have found some gems and take some time to find them. And the reason why this event was originally a 2-day event is evidenced by the volume of questions that I now have in front of me. So we're going to,
we definitely want to send them on.
Well, yes, and I think it's a very strong indicator that this type of session is very valuable, and we are definitely going to do more of it. Brazil now, Fernanda, and I guess her question really is about, in your particular organisation, do you have support of particular members of Parliament or politicians who support you by opening doors or engaging with the cause? Because sometimes, obviously, they may have a parent or family member. Just make a comment on that, or how you find those people even.
Absolutely, an excellent question. We really do have key allies. It saddens me that it's always got to do with the personal experience, because until that changes, nothing changes, in my opinion. But you're right, they absolutely do open the doors for us. They get us into the gates of Parliament. They start to shout, and they start to encourage us to shout louder. So yes, you only need one though, and you will find others will follow. But yes, we do have those key allies. And unfortunately, is usually personal experience that. I say unfortunately, I hope you understand what I mean by that. It's
of course. I think our next speaker is coming from the political domain, and we can probably address this. But maybe it's something going forward as we develop this series that we would look at. How do we do that? How do we find these people and learn from people who've had success in that? Susie Burney from the Obesity Alliance sends her good wishes and thanks you, Avril, for useful points that's going to be helping their organisation get off the ground, which I hope will be also as part of the Global Hub. So we'll be talking to you, Susie, again on that. Elizabeth Dupont from the diabetes community. The feeling of being part of a meaningful community is very important. What would be for you the key elements to ensure long-term engagement? So it's almost back to that question of recruitment and maintenance, finding the people, and then how do we keep them with us? Any thoughts on that?
I think from the organisation's perspective, please look after your people. They are so valuable. You are nothing without them. So, really, really support the patient advocates. And that is absolutely critical. And if you're not getting that support as a patient advocate, I would reframe your thinking on being part of an organisation. As the patient advocate, look after yourself, because you are the critical currency, as I call it. And be aware that that this is really challenging work, and you're not infallible, and look after yourself and look after each other. Get that peer network, because they really, the people we work with, they really have such a sense of solidarity with each other. So look after each other, I think, would be my main point on that. And it's not easy, and that's what I was trying to put across in the presentation, to do that, but it's fundamental.
Okay, thank you for that. Again, we're right on the nose of the time for the next speaker. A whole lot of questions there. Again, it's good to get these questions recorded here, because it'll give us pointers for what to perhaps probe into in the future. Can I just ask you personally one quick question? Is my sense of the way you presented today was that the advocacy group was almost like an element of the Alzheimer's Society. In other words, it's like an offshoot, or it's a standalone entity. Is that the way it's structured? It's like a working group of the overall organization?
Yeah, okay, that's pretty much a great kind of description of it. It's funded, so the roles that support it are funded by the Alzheimer's Society, but we try to give the working group autonomy to do what it is that they want. However, we also kind of come back to that goals thing. We try to make sure the goals align, and that we intersect in terms of the working group members informing our HR department when they're, we started to get people with dementia. We run day services as well, and get them on the interview panels for recognizing someone that can or cannot communicate with the person with dementia. So yes, we're kind of and I think we still have a bit of an evolution to go, and we were very much guided by what they did in Scotland. And I think finding a group that you identify with and that shares the vision and the values that you want to bring is really helpful. They were really our guide, and I should have acknowledged them. I always do. If there's anyone from Scotland, it's not the Scottish Dementia Working Group, but yeah, they having a kind of it was always, they're part of our organisation, but they have an autonomy. And we have a Dementia Carers campaign network as well, which reaches out to family carers, because I'm sure it's the same for every disease area. It's two sides of one coin, but the coin looks very different on both sides, and the experiences are different. So we acknowledge that in the organisation as well. And as Pat said in the video, they inform and guide us in terms of what we're calling for and campaigning for. But they're our gold piece of armor. They really are, in terms of what we've achieved.
Yeah, no, I suppose I'm drawing analogies to what we're building in the global hub. In effect, the hub is a series of patient councils, and the patient councils are effectively the working groups. And so from your presentation alone, I've got a lot of very valuable insights there and some of the things we need to do. You've 30 years experience ahead of us, so we'll eventually get there. Now, our next speaker is Gay Mitchell. Maeve or Maureen, is Gay on the line with us? Or we're going to go, I believe, Gay's presentation is going to come into us as a recording, but he will then join us. Is that correct? So Maureen, can you unmute?
Correct. Yeah, I think it's coming up here now.
Okay, so let me just introduce, say a few words about Gay. So Gay Mitchell has held a career in Irish politics, so well known on the island of Ireland, but also a member of the European Parliament, where he served on the Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee. He's also a former Lord Mayor of Dublin City, the capital, and a first citizen of the capital, well known, as I said, in Irish politics, and well known for his involvement in the not-for-profit world and advocacy world. So Gay was concerned about his web link today and decided to record his presentation, which we'll listen to, and then he'll be on the call to take some questions. So if you play it there. Thanks. I haven't got sound there, Maureen. Maeve or Maureen, which of you has the control of the sound?
Yeah, I can share it here.
It's not, would maybe just give it 1 second, Maureen. It's actually coming in from Gay's side, but if it doesn't work, we have it on back.
I hope you find this presentation of interest. When I'm finished, I'll be happy to take some questions. I thought that I might start by the experience of politicians who often get a bad time, but in my experience, the average politician is idealistic, and almost all of those I've met set out to provide for the common good as fairly as possible. And public representatives must use the authority they have to serve the public good, and to do so in a way which serves minorities as well as majorities, say over a fixed period of 5 years. It's an interesting and demanding challenge, and it's impossible to meet all of the demands all of the time. So what do you need to know to approach a politician? Well, public representatives are meant to plan. They must think of, example, the number of fire stations a community will need. You can't tell someone who's on fire that a station is planned. They've got to douse the flames. So it's getting the balance between the emergency response, such as dealing with homelessness, and long-term planning, such as housing supply, that is the business of politics. And however sound political judgment may be, it's always necessary to be aware of public opinion. In a democracy, the citizen's voice must be heard, and as part of the democratic process, argument can influence government planning. Citizens should be enabled to input to the decision-making process. A little bit about central government now, if I might. In Ireland, at central government level, this is done through the civil service and by direct representations to ministers and members of national parliaments. So citizens and organisations can express their concerns about and submit ideas for government policy and legislation. Sometimes this is best done through professional or trade organisations or trade unions as well as NGOs, and sometimes it's best done directly by an individual. Ireland is the system I know best, but every state has similar avenues for communicating with lawmakers. So how is a law made? Well, let me say a few words about the legislative process at both national and European levels, but the same principles apply in all democracies. In Ireland, for example, when legislation is published, it's introduced in our national House of Representatives, the Dáil, or sometimes in the Senate. And this is a technical stage, as is the final stage of the bill. An act or law is called a bill while it is being debated and amended. So the first stage is simply to introduce the bill. The last stage is simply to say that the bill do now pass. But the three stages in between are the most important stages of legislation. The second stage is where the broad principles of the bill are debated on the floor of each House of Parliament in turn. This is where a minister outlines the contents and objectives of a bill, and members of Parliament have the opportunity to say what they welcome and what they would like to see changed in a bill. The committee, detailed amendments, and report, final amendment stages of a bill are now usually considered in parliamentary committees, though this can be done on the floor of the House. There, the bill is amended by proposals made by ministers having listened to the second stage debate, as well as individual members of Parliament. Deletions and additions are made before the final stage passes. It's open to the public to try to persuade their members of Parliament to amend the bill before it becomes law. This is the process used in the Westminster model, and similar approaches are taken in non-Westminster type parliamentary systems. Furthermore, often before legislation is published, committees of Parliament will hold hearings on issues and then make recommendations for government policy or new legislation. And individuals and organisations can be invited to input to this process, or indeed can offer to do so. In passing, let me make mention of local government. In all countries, councillors make local government policy. However, councillors can also influence national policy, A, through their political parties, where they are members, and B, by direct contact with members of national parliaments and MEPs, who often rely on councillors and their local contacts at election time. So they usually have a direct line to national politicians. Don't ignore councillors. They can be influential beyond their local area. A little about targeting decision makers. When targeting decision makers, decide what it is you want to communicate or lobby on. Make sure it's focused and not too broadly drawn. A shopping list approach is best avoided. Have a small number of well-honed objectives when meeting officials or MEPs. Be prepared to make presentations to your own national parliament member or national or European committees if the opportunity exists. You can influence policy in this way. The funding for the implementation of the policy behind laws is also provided by the parliamentarians. So funds are limited and can be provided only by taxation or borrowing, which in turn has to be paid for through taxation. As resources are limited, not every cause will be resourced. The political agenda is like a conveyor belt. When one item falls off or is complete, another item takes its place. Your issue must be on the conveyor belt so that your case for a share of the resources is heard. Let me say a little bit about Europe. At national level in most countries, members of Parliament can introduce proposed legislation. But in the European Union, only the European Commission can introduce laws. These mainly take two formats: directives and regulations. Directives apply to all member states, but can be applied slightly differently in each state. Regulations apply in each member state without variation. Once the Commission introduces a proposal, however, the Council of Ministers and the European Parliament decide on its detailed final contents. Rather like any bicameral parliament, that's a parliament with two houses, like the US Senate and the House of Representatives, where both entities can't come to agreement on the final wording of legislation. There's what's called the conciliation process, where both sides try to iron things out. So the Commission does not make law. As far as legislation is concerned, the time to lobby them for legislative cover is before they publish the proposed law. At EU level, the Council of Ministers meets in different formats in order to address issues, formats like agriculture ministers, finance ministers and employment ministers. Similarly, the Parliament has committees of MEPs, such as the Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee, the Employment and Social Affairs Committee and the Transport Committee. These council and committee formats deal with the legislation in detail. Every proposal from the Commission is disposed of by Parliament and Council in this way. The wording of legislation is crucial, for this is what provides the power to take a particular action. You can influence this amending process. Furthermore, the European Parliament has intergroups and working groups of MEPs which consider issues such as disability. These are informal groupings. They also have delegations such as the African, European and Pacific EU delegation or the China EU delegation. There's a multiplicity of these informal groupings, and they are organised and can be very influential. If there's a working group or delegation that deals with your issue, get to know the members who sit on it. At national level, ministers and members of parliament and civil servants can be contacted to discuss concerns. This is a well-known process. What is less well known is at EU level the role of the European Parliament and how powerful individual MEPs can be, especially if they are members or substitute members of a relevant committee or part of a group or delegation. MEPs can, if organised and informed, carry great influence with their fellow MEPs. To see, there's no government in the European Parliament. It's more like the US House of Representatives. All MEPs network and try to accommodate each other if possible, because in turn they will be seeking support for some other issue. And similarly, the Council of Ministers and the Commission network with Parliament and vice versa. Unlike some national parliaments, the whip system in the European Parliament is more relaxed. So individual MEPs have greater freedom and can break with the group or the party line, often without penalty. And this can be important in tight voting situations. It can also be noted that MEPs can sponsor what are called own initiative reports in committees. These can call on the Commission to bring forward legislative proposals where the Commission decides, when the Commission is deciding on its programme. So MEPs ratify the appointment of the Commission itself and can jointly decide the annual EU budget as well with the Council of Ministers. This gives them an enormous influence over Commission policy. Far from being undemocratic, the European Union is one of the most open lawmaking processes globally, and the agenda can be influenced if there's a good case to be made. There are, of course, rules of conduct and ethics which MEPs and anybody lobbying them must observe, but these are easily learned. Let me say a little bit about communicating to MEPs and the European Union and what sort of networks to use. To add emphasis, the Council of Ministers and the Commission of the European Union are of course important. The European Parliament is also important and has grown to be a strong part of the decision-making process. Nationally, it's easier to access your MEP than a commissioner or minister. Most of the decisions that matter are co-decided with Council in parliamentary committees. In these committees, chairs and party or group coordinators, rapporteurs and shadow rapporteurs, that is the particular MEPs shepherding the law, are the most influential members. When an MEP of a particular party is appointed rapporteur for a piece of legislation or a policy matter, all other parties appoint shadow rapporteurs. This small group then becomes central to the ultimate shape the law or report will take. So the coordinators are leading MEPs from each party or group, and they control the allocation of legislative proposals to other MEPs called rapporteurs. If you can interest a particular MEP in your cause, you can always encourage him or her to seek to be rapporteur on a matter of particular interest to you. If he or she has a good relationship with his or her coordinator, they may well be accommodated. In the relevant committees, all MEPs are important, but especially those in a position to influence the shape and timing of the final outcome, that is, coordinators and rapporteurs. In addition, MEPs can table questions or can be persuaded to form a working group on issues of concern or to lobby the Commission on behalf of a particular cause. They will be listened to. MEPs also can set the agenda of their groups, as political parties are known in the European Parliament. If you get a large group on your side, your prospects of success are greatly enhanced. If the rapporteur is from such a group and you have his or her support, the prospects for getting his or her entire group behind a proposal
are usually advanced. Now let me say a word about the rotating presidency of the Council of Ministers. The Council of Ministers is best influenced at national level. However, the presidency of the Council of Ministers continues to rotate every 6 months. Now, the President of the European Council, that's the heads of state or government, is appointed for 2.5 years, and that's renewable once. But the 6-monthly rotating presidency, where each member state takes over for 6 months in turn, handles all of the ongoing legislation and reports during their term. This opportunity is often ignored, as the rotating presidency is presumed to have been sidelined by the permanent president of the council. This is a mistake. For legislative matters, the rotating presidency can be crucial. They want to get as much work done within their 6 months as possible. And if they are closing a file, you may want your concerns to be addressed within that file. So how to network and who to network? Networking the commissioners and commission staff is imperative. Sometimes inviting commission speakers to address seminars or meetings will assist with this. Being always prepared to supply speakers for commission organised events will also be helpful. Asking MEPs to host a conference in Parliament, visiting MEPs and commissioners and their staff, hosting an occasional lunch, dinner, or simply having a cup of coffee or tea with key people such as parliamentary assistants or group or committee staff is a necessary part of networking. Sometimes this can be done in the margins of another event identified as important to attend. Every networking event should have well-honed key messages to import. So networking may involve public speaking, private meetings, writing articles, making helpful proposals, or hosting information meetings. This can apply to national as well as federal parliaments and governments. At EU level, emailing is the most usual avenue of first contact, and this can be followed up and should be followed up by a phone call to see if the email has been received, if they require further information, and if there is anything you can do to assist, and particularly to ask, would they bring the email to the attention of their MEP. At European level, MEPs, ministers, commissioners, the staff of all the institutions, personal assistants to MEPs, secretariats of parliamentary committees, the political party secretariats that feed into these committees, youth wings of political parties, and women's groups within political parties, all can be networked. Similar work at national level, inside and outside the EU, will pay dividends. This takes time and sometimes a lot of shoe leather. Don't try doing it without a plan. Identify first those you need to speak to. Plan the work the plan. Networking is the door to success, and perspiration is the key. Now, let me say a little bit about the United States and other countries, just by contrast, because the US system is not all that different. But it is organised in a different way. The former Speaker of the United States House of Representatives, Tip O'Neill, thanked a long-term neighbour of his once for voting for him in the recent elections, and she responded that she hadn't voted for him on this occasion. And when he asked why, she said it was because he never asked her. He never made that mistake again. Congressman O'Neill said, and I agree with him, all politics are local. And even as Speaker O'Neill, when he was head of the House of Representatives, Tip O'Neill had local contacts, such as barbers or people like that, who would pass a message on to him. So making contact as directly as possible with your elected representative is important. Don't wait until you have something to ask of them. Invite them to open days, seminars, to be guest speakers, to do official openings. That's the way they're already going to be conscious about you, and it'll be easier for you to get their attention on other occasions when you need it. If you form a Friends of Your Association group, get as many elected representatives as possible to join and to put their names on your headed notepaper. When public administrators or civil servants see this and that you have cross-party support, it will impress them. Let me give you one example how we influence decision making in the European Parliament by one such operation. The working group on epilepsy was set up by me. I was persuaded by the Irish Epilepsy Association to set up this informal working group of MEPs to highlight concerns on epilepsy. And I took on the task, and with the assistance of epilepsy associations in every member state, we got about 20 MEPs or so to join our working group. And our combined efforts resulted in a declaration on epilepsy being passed by the European Parliament with one of the biggest majorities ever. Most MEPs were too busy to attend our meetings all of the time, but all we really wanted was their name on our headed paper as a working group member. Then, when we communicated with the Commission, our case was taken seriously because of the number of MEPs prepared to put their names in support of us. By constantly networking and holding annual epilepsy days in Parliament, this working group succeeded in not only getting epilepsy on the radar for support from the Directorate General for Health, but also from the Directorate General for Research and Innovation. The EU devotes about 500 million a year to brain research through the EU Framework for Research and Innovation. Over the last decade, the EU dedicated nearly 176 million euros to epilepsy research in order to advance diagnostic tools and therapeutic interventions. The money supported 62 projects in the 7th Framework Programme and 30 projects in Horizon 2020. For those of you not familiar with this, Horizon 2020 funds research and innovation with about 80 billion spent in the years 2014 to 2020. The next programme, Horizon Europe, will have a similar project. So we can tap into those funds. We can tap into those projects if we organised. Let me make 3 points in conclusion. 1. Professor Alistair Blair of the Montfort University, Leicester, in his book, The European Union, writes that the decisions of the European Union did not materialise in some miraculous way from the predominantly Brussels-based EU institutions. Governments, companies, NGOs and individuals undertake lobbying to ensure that their views are taken into consideration, and those who understand this and know how to do it effectively can really succeed and help set the agenda. 2. Networking is key to advancing any plan. No two networking plans are the same. They are bespoke, made to measure. And 3, practice makes perfect. Dr. Viktor Frankl was an Austrian who suffered in Auschwitz for his Jewish faith. And he held that the pursuit of happiness is a waste of time. The more you pursue happiness, the more elusive it becomes. Happiness ensues. It follows from our effective actions. Actions must be effective. Don't mistake activity for action. Also, Gary Player, the famous golfer, when he was at the height of his career as a leading world sportsman, was asked if luck played a part, and he replied, yes, luck plays a part. The strange thing is, the more I practice, the luckier I get. Every industrialist, scientist, politician, and senior public servant has a full agenda. It's never empty. As one thing falls off the agenda, another takes its place. The key is to get your issue on the agenda and to keep it there by constant networking until you meet success. Practice makes perfect. Success ensues. Thank you very much. I'll be happy to deal with any questions you might have.
Thank you, Gay. If you can unmute your mic there, if that's possible, Gay. I think.
Is the mic on?
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Okay. Yeah.
So, I hope you could you see that?
Yes. Yeah. We could see it and we could hear it. So thank you very much for that. And I have a number of questions, 1 or 2 of my own, and 1 or 2 that were submitted a little earlier. I suppose I start from my own point of view. Sitting and listening to you, I come away with the impression that, not surprisingly, that really, at the end of the day, advocacy and policy are all about influence. And the politician is the person that we as the advocates need to influence. So as somebody who has been there, you've been that politician, can you give us an insight into, for example, there are 50 people on this call right now, and let's imagine they were all representing a particular concern, as they're all representing patient groups, particular health concern. And if they all send you an email in the morning asking you to do something for them, how do you make the decision? You personally, what comes into play in your decision-making process? You get 50 emails into your inbox. Hey, Gay, help us out here. We want to change policy at the European Parliament, for example. Can you talk us through what influences you to react or not react?
Well, thank you very much. First of all, because we live in democracy, politicians are constantly portrayed, and people rarely get to see politicians as they are. Politicians are human beings with their own concerns, their own pressures, and they really want to make a difference and to improve things for people generally. But when you get 50 emails, you're going to have to prioritize them in some way. And the chances of the politicians seeing those emails are very remote. That's why I said in the presentation there, if you send an email, maybe ring the parliamentary assistant and say, look, is there any chance you put this in front of the politician? I think one of the things we've got to remember is that in not just politicians, but civil servants and public servants generally, they've got a very busy agenda, a very busy life. And really, I think what you've got to do is get their attention. And I think the way to do that is not to rely so much on emails, but as much personal contact as you can. And if not with the member of parliament himself or herself, then with somebody close to him or her, parliamentary assistant, somebody like that. I think it's very important that we use persuasion, and that some people think that if you can twist somebody's arm, the day before an election, say, give us a promise and we'll do this. That never works, because once the election is over, that's gone. So you have to persuade. And I think the important way of doing that is to get in as close as you can to the person making decisions, so that you can help him or her to make this a priority and to pick it out of the 50 emails that he or she gets.
Okay, so a related question is, you mentioned that you set up the working group on epilepsy, for example, in the European Parliament. Now, for that to happen, somebody influenced you to take that initiative. Can you, if it's not too private an issue, can you give us some insight as to how that came about? What motivated you to pick epilepsy over some other condition?
Yeah. Well, your last speaker said often there's a personal contact. I was very young when I was elected as city councillor here in Dublin. I was 27. In 1979, I was married in 1980, and then I was elected to our national parliament in 81. I was 29. And my wife was canvassing for me. We had 3 elections in 81, 82, and it was an unbelievably pressured period. And she was knocking on a door, and she collapsed at the doorstep. And a relative of mine who was with her was a doctor, and he first thought she was pregnant, expecting a baby. Anyway, it turned out to be epilepsy. That was way back then in 1981. And she has lived with it ever since. And the real manager of my campaigns, a lot of people had the title of campaign manager, but Norma ran the campaigns. Now, as it happened, the Irish Epilepsy Association had their headquarters in my constituency on a main road, and they offered me the facility of their offices for a constituency clinic to meet constituents, and I accepted that. And from there, they sort of drew me in and said, would you help us? And I said yes. And then when I became an MEP, they said, could you take this issue up in the Parliament? And that's when I went about setting up a working group. But they made the case to me, but I was already disposed to that issue. A bit like today, my mother had a heart problem all her life, so when you asked me to do this, I didn't have any difficulty. And for most politicians, they will make there will be some personal contact that will cause them to become involved in the first case.
Yeah. So I think you've really sort of confirmed your own phrase that all politics is local. And I suppose it's, from an advocate's point of view, what's coming across very clearly here is we've got to connect with the politician. How we do that, in your case, there was an element of luck there on the epilepsy thing, or misfortune, if you wish, but there was a personal connection. So I think that there's an important message in that. A couple of other questions, Gay, if I can. One is, and this actually relates to something I was going to ask you as well. The question comes in from Grania, and she's asking, how do we turn commitment from politicians into actual funding? So the politician that says, oh yeah, I'll represent you, or I'll keep that in mind. How do we turn it into funding? And in answering that, maybe you could also just address your own experience on the epilepsy side. You mentioned about massive research funding from the European Parliament. Was that linked to your work in epilepsy? Did you manage to leverage some funding from that? So if you could answer that question, but also the more basic question, how do we get the political support to translate funding?
In the Parliament, to take the second part of the question, we created an atmosphere where it was very hard to ignore us. Every year we had a National Epilepsy Day. We got something like 420 or 30 MEPs to sign our declaration, which was one of the biggest number ever. We had a lot of names on our headed paper of maybe 20 or 30 MEPs who supported us. And so when we wanted to speak to the Commission, we could point to these things. And they already had this budget for brain-related issues, but we weren't getting a look into that fund. And then they started to take epilepsy a little bit more seriously. And occasionally then they would ask me as chairman of the working group, would I go and speak at a Commission health function? And sometimes I didn't want to go because I had other things to do, but I would always oblige, always say yes, even if it meant putting myself out and traveling to some other place to do it, because that allowed me to continue to be in touch with the people who made decisions. It's very easy to, well, not very easy, but you can get a law passed on almost anything. But a law on its own is not much use unless the funding is there to back it up. So you need to have a line in the budget that says this money can be used for either broad, brain-related issues, or specifically for epilepsy or for heart issues or whatever. And so you really need to not just think in terms of the health committee of a parliament, but also the budget committee of a parliament. In the European context, for example, there is a committee that deals with health-related issues and another committee that deals with research and innovation, but there's also a budget committee. And all the time MEPs are networking with each other. But if you had a good input to the budget committee and had an MEP's ear who was on that committee, he or she could help concentrate the minds of the committee on your funding needs. And the thing of it is, look, this is a competition. There's only so many taxes that the people will tolerate being raised. And there's a constant competition for those resources. And sometimes people who have the inside track are getting resourced on an annual basis, and it just continues, maybe sometimes after the funding is really of great benefit to them and would be more beneficial to somebody else. So if you're constantly making your case, I think you should be making it based on the need for policy, law, and funding.
Okay. Somewhat related questions, but I'll give each one individually rather than try and group them together. Very often when there's a particular issue that needs to be highlighted, you hear of groups, advocacy groups, mass mailing MEPs to highlight an issue. So bombarding them with emails. What are your thoughts on those types of campaigns where you have lots of people mailing to highlight an issue? Are they effective?
No, I don't think they are effective. First of all, their emails, they're blocked. The Parliament has a blocking system, and it will, this is one of the reasons I said if you send an email, you might check that they got it, because sometimes things are blocked that weren't intended to be blocked. And secondly, they won't take in mass deliveries of documents in most parliaments because of this. I don't think there's any substitute for shoe leather. And you've got to overcome your own prejudice. You've got to stop thinking about politicians as bad people or people who are only there for themselves or are only there for the next election. If you're thinking like that, you're losing from the beginning. Everybody who's in politics is there to serve, and they work with public servants who are sort of the permanent government, so to speak. And you've got to learn how to make that system work to your benefit. But cynicism is of no assistance to you, and laziness won't assist you either. You've got to make your case, and you've got to fight for your case. And if you really have it in your heart, sometimes it's very hard for people to ignore you. If they really can see your conviction, they can become convinced as well. So I think there's no replacement for personal contact, shoe leather, and finding constant innovative ways to get individuals' attention.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good answer. One politician known to all of us is very fond of Twitter, on the international front at least. And there's a question in here that was sent in advance, and it relates to, I guess, how some groups have an advocacy social media account as such on Twitter. They've a Twitter advocacy account. I suppose two questions around this. One is, as a politician, if you're aware of a particular Twitter account, for example, or a Facebook account or whatever, that's very strong in advocacy, is it something you engage with? Do you find it useful? Do you shy away from it? Or are there any particular Twitter or social media platforms that politicians are attracted to?
Well, I don't personally. That sort of passed me by. But what tends to happen is that politicians' parliamentary assistants are usually younger, and often they do, and they might bring something to his or her attention that's trending. I think it's a bit dangerous, because if you have a politician who follows Twitter and some other new trend comes on the next day, they say this is a better Twitter. I just think it lacks substance, and it's a bit like politicians who will get up in Parliament and make a lot of noise, whatever Parliament it is, and that sounds great, but people tend to ignore that person. If you want to get something done, you have to work with other MEPs, other members of Parliament, to try and win their attention, win their interest. And even if they can't do it there and then, they might say, well, look, we'll do it another way or at another time. But they're not going to be impressed. Other politicians generally are not going to be impressed by grandstanding or by, a big Twitter account. It might impress the media or social media in particular, but I don't think it will have the same impact as the sort of personal stories you can relate or the personal contact you might have.
Yeah. Well, I know you're effectively retired from European Parliament now, so I'm not quite sure to what extent the sort of digital advocacy space had where that was at, but you have all sorts of strategies now, using politicians' followers to influence their decisions and all of this sort of stuff. Would you have any sense, and maybe you're not close enough to it, to comment on where you think this whole digital advocacy, the role it plays in modern decision making?
Well, it does play a big part. I mean, I'm on a number of organizations, involved still with a number of organizations myself. I chair some of them. I chair a group dealing with Alzheimer, not dealing with motor neuron disease and Parkinson's. And I chair a school and a care service in a very poor community. And I'm involved with a body that deals with people with disability. So we advocate too. And I think, you know, sometimes a mixture of experience and youth is a good thing. People who have the new media and people who have the experience of how the system actually works. I have a personal dislike of smilers and charmers. I was taught at a very early age, handsome is as handsome does. And I think if people do things rather than smile at you and pat you on the back and tell you how wonderful you are, I think that's a far better person to have on your side. And as somebody who advocates now for a lot of voluntary organizations, I'd rather pick the person who, if I thought I could persuade him or her, would make a difference than simply, you know, have a broad approach to an issue.
And I suppose one final question, and going back to that comment about all politics is local, and given that your experience has been at Irish politics and in so national and European politics, for those of us on the call that are in the European domain, strategically, and it seems that there's very strong things coming across for me anyway in this presentation, is that you've got to be strategic in how you reach out to your political prospects, if you will, to influence policy. Would you be advocating that if you have an issue, that you start in your national parliament before you go to the European Parliament? Or, you know, if you go to the European Parliament or try and reach out and engage with the European Parliament, are you missing a step on the ladder if you just go straight there as opposed to engaging nationally?
Well, I think primarily health issues are an issue for national governments and parliaments. But the European Parliament and Commission has a health remit, more to do with safety and things of that kind. But more and more, when you see the sort of pandemic we've just gone through, the European Council of Ministers decide to use the institutions of the Union on major issues rather than to try to do them themselves. So I think in the case of cardiovascular issues, I think that they are both a national and a European issue. And I think you've got to do both. And to think about who it is you need to target, what you want to say to them, what you might want to say to the health committee of the national parliament might be different to what you want to say to the research and innovation committee of the European Parliament if you're trying to get a share in their horizon budget. So you have to hone and look at the people you're trying to influence and see where the power rests, and then adapt your strategy accordingly.
Super. Gay, in the interest of time, we will leave you now. Can I say sincerely, thank you very much for that really excellent presentation and really clear insight into, in contrast to what we heard from the first speaker, you know, at the end of the day, we do need to engage with and influence the political system if we want to impact change in policy. And obviously, you give us very valuable insights there and some very practical tips. Thank you so much for your time, and not just today, Gay, but also for going to the trouble of recording. And I know you did that because you were concerned that your web connection would fail today. So I really appreciate all the effort you went to. So thank you very much, and continue your good work. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we're spot on time, which is great. It's 16:15 local, and our next speaker I see is with us, Craig Dwyer. Craig, you're very welcome, and thank you for joining us as well. Craig is going to take us down the road, I guess, of where we just left off there with Gay, into the digital sphere of advocacy. He is a digital campaigns and communications specialist. He has extensive experience using these new methods of communication to effect radical change, and he works with campaigning NGOs, commercial entities, and also in traditional broadcast media. He was the social media director for the Yes Equality campaign for civil marriage equality in Ireland, which was a landmark advocacy challenge, if you will, and success in terms of outcome. So he has considerable experience in this area. He's also a part-time lecturer on the MSc in Public Relations at Dublin City University. Craig, thank you so much for being with us, and I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I'm just bringing up my slides here now. Thanks a million, Neil, for that lovely introduction, and to yourself, Maeve, and the Global Heart Hub for inviting me to speak this afternoon, and welcome to you all. Now, yes, sorry, so can you see my screen there now? Yeah, so my name is Craig Dwyer. I am the founder of For a Change. Yes, essentially I work with campaign groups, nonprofit organizations, activists on using digital and social media, strategic communications for progressive social change. And the focus of the session this afternoon is around advocacy and communications. We're going to focus on digital advocacy as well. So using our own channels to really get our message across to our target audiences. So with that, look, a little bit of a background, and Neil has covered most of this. Previously I was the social media director for Yes Equality in 2015, when Ireland became the first country in the world to introduce marriage equality by a vote of the people. And this was very much the first time that digital and social media was used in new and innovative ways, certainly in an Irish political campaigning context. And I think what we showed was that, yes, it was a powerful communications tool, but it was also really powerful for organizing and mobilizing our supporters right across the country as well, and using it as a driver of mobilization to the polls. And I'll talk a little bit more about that campaign later on. After the Yes Equality, I went to work for News Talk, which is Ireland's largest commercial radio station. So very much kind of like take what would have been traditionally, an on-air media product and bringing that to online audiences as well. And then, so the For a Change is the result of a fellowship that I was awarded from the Social Change Initiative, which is a philanthropic organization based in Belfast in the north of Ireland. And my fellowship was all about creating this resource for campaigners, for NGOs on using digital and social media in effective ways. So I continue to do that now. So just kind of setting a little bit of context then, the internet, digital, social media, it's fundamentally changed how we go about our lives, how we go about our business, and often you hear of this term digital transformation, and it's sometimes more associated with the kind of the more corporate or the commercial world, but the NGO sector, the advocacy sector, the health sector, all undergoing its own digital transformation, and not only are there new channels of communication, but how audiences are interacting, consuming content is constantly evolving as well, and often that presents a challenge to be able to adapt and respond alongside of those as well, but ultimately I think that, if we can kind of like fully embrace kind of like, digital tools, social media, they do allow us to become better communicators, better campaigners, and better advocates as well, So just again, kind of like for context, there's this report that comes out yearly. It's called the NGO Global Technology Report. So I know we have a global audience here, and this is a global report. It just looks at how NGOs across the world are using digital and social media for their work. So just looking at some of the results from the most recent 2019 reports, you can see there, for over like 5,721 NGOs participated in the survey from 160 countries all around the world, and you can see some of those within the health space as well. And out of those 5,721, 90% of those, so the vast majority, are regularly using social media to engage their supporters and their donors. They agree that it's effective for online brand awareness, recruiting attendees, for creating social change, for recruiting volunteers, and for inspiring people to take action. And this point for me is very important, and certainly if we're thinking about advocacy, it's how we use digital and social media as a tool. That's, like I see myself kind of first and foremost as like a campaigner, and these like digital social media, they're my tools to help me to do what I do. And, you know, but it's how do we use them to drive this action? And that's where the kind of the strategic element of this comes in, you know. So sometimes social media in particular can be criticized as being like, you know, clicktivism or slacktivism. It's not like real kind of like action. But for me, it's like when it's used effectively, you know, we're using these online platforms to drive this action as well, you know. So I think that's the crux of, for me, of like of an effective digital advocacy strategy. So we'll look at ways of doing that as well. But some like good, positive, encouraging stats here: 90% regularly using social media. But if we break this down, only 44% actually have a written social media strategy. 42% have a content calendar to help with their social media campaigns, and only 27% have a system in place for tracking and reporting on their return on investment in their digital and their social media. And I think that, like, you know, there's a bit of a disconnect here. You know, so whilst you might be active like in the space, I think, you know, without having a proper strategy or a plan in place, I think, you know, you're not going to get the most out of the platforms, you know. So it's just something to kind of definitely keep in mind. And then, you know, thinking about kind of like the planning and the resourcing, things like a content calendar really like assist with that. And then being able to track your return on your investment is really, really important. One of the great things about digital and social media is the ability to measure everything that you're doing. And there's great learning in that, you know. So when you're promoting your own advocacy objectives, your own key messages, you can see how many people you reached, like where, like how many clicked over to your website, what actions did they take, all of those, you know, and you can get great insight from that to guide your future work as well, you know, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. So essentially what I'm trying to get across here is, you know, I think there is a difference between being active in the space as opposed to actually using it strategically, you know. And sometimes when it comes to digital and social media, it can be a little bit of an afterthought or a little bit of a bolt-on. And what I would be kind of saying is to take it from the outside and bring it right into the center. So when we are planning our advocacy campaigns, our upcoming events, activities, things like that, we're thinking at that stage, okay, well, what do we want this to look like online? How are we going to use digital and social media to help us achieve X, Y, and Z? And I think if you can reframe it and operate that way, you will get a lot more of a return for your efforts, okay? Yeah, so just kind of like, why should we be using kind of like digital advocacy then? You know, like digital social media, they have become critical channels for communications. It really does like help shape public thought about our organizations through communication of key messages with key stakeholder groups as well, you know. And public discourse has become very much like a dialogue with social media, providing that other voice, you know. And media are still very, very important, but they're no longer the gatekeepers of information. You know, we have the ability now to kind of like control and promote and amplify our own messages directly to our audiences, our key stakeholders through these platforms as well. And then ultimately, I think, yeah, you know, when used strategically, I think they are critical channels for helping us to meet our aims and our objectives as well. So with that said then, so just thinking about kind of putting an advocacy strategy in place, and specifically with that kind of like digital lens as well. So just a couple, like these kind of 3 R's that I think we need at the outset as well. The first one is recognize, like having that recognition that these are, you know, important tools to use, you know, having that kind of like buy-in is really important at the outset. So I think once we have the recognition, then it's about allocating appropriate and adequate resources for that, you know, in terms of like personnel, also budget to be able to implement your strategy. And then if you do have that recognition, you do allocate those resources, well then, you know, you will realize the benefits that these tools can have for you. So I've come up with these kind of like 7 questions to be thinking about or beginning to answer when putting together an advocacy strategy. So at the outset, being very clear on what are your aims and your objectives, and outlining those, you know, and it might be linked to, you know, your overall campaign strategy, your communication strategy, but then thinking at that stage, okay, well, how can we use digital to help to really kind of like promote and amplify this, you know? So setting that out at the outset and feeding into that, then really important, identifying and prioritizing who are your key target audiences. So who are you trying to reach, engage, and influence, and prioritizing those as well, because that will really help to inform the rest of the process as well, you know? So for example, like Gay, the last speaker, you know, was talking about engaging with MEPs and engaging with politicians, you know, and there was discussion around Twitter. So certainly, like I was saying, like if you are, like if they are a primary target audience for you, so politicians, media, commentators, they're really active like in that Twitter space, you know, so we'll need to kind of incorporate that into our strategy. You know, or if you're primarily trying to target people in kind of like maybe older demographics, you know, like Facebook is probably the best platform for that still, because it's the biggest platform and has the broadest reach amongst demographics, as opposed to if you're like, well, no, we're just targeting younger people for this one, well, then you might be thinking of Instagram, and that's where you would prioritize your resources. Okay, so I think it's really important because you don't want to spread your resources too thinly. So it's trying to match the resources and your efforts to your target audiences and your aims and your objectives. Okay. And then so the next stage in the process then is, you know, what are you going to say to them? So this is all about, like, you know, the campaign, the framing, the messaging. I think is really, like, I try and follow a structure around this. So, you know, thinking about your issue, framing it in the most authentic and compelling way, and appealing to people's values. So if people are not directly affected or impacted by the issue, still being able to connect with them and get them to recognize and realize why this is important, showing them how things can improve, and then what they can do to help improve that. You know, if you can kind of try and frame your messaging in that way, I think that will also kind of like help to meet those aims and objectives and engage those audiences. Yeah, so we're talking there about kind of like what platforms you will use. So again, trying to match what you're trying to achieve, who your target audiences are, to the appropriate platforms. So like a question that I get asked a lot is like, you know, what's the next new platform now? You know, where are all the kids at? And you know, my answer is always like, okay, well, where are you currently? Like, what platforms are you using? And are you getting the most out of those? You know, and I think that's where you should kind of like focus again, rather than spreading your resources too thinly, just being a little bit more selective and strategic about what platforms you're using, in order to meet those aims and objectives, you know. So I do think that is important. And just just picking up on kind of like what Gay was saying as well, you know, like I totally agree in terms of like those personal connections and the shoe leather, like, you know, they're the best kind of like ways of engaging with kind of politicians, but sometimes we're not maybe afforded that opportunity as well, you know. And I think, and again, it's where we can kind of like use these tools to help kind of like, you know, just support and amplify our other activities, you know. So as part of your campaign, there's probably going to be different strands where, you know, you are kind of like engaging in maybe more traditional lobbying. You do have like a media strategy, but then you're also like, you're supporting that with kind of with getting your supporters to push out content through Twitter, aimed at getting in front of the stakeholder group as well. So I certainly wouldn't be advocating for let's do Twitter, don't focus on anything else. No, you know, it's about it fully integrating it into the rest of your campaign. I think that's where it's important. It's not one or the other, but it's making sure that they can complement each other. And then you're reaching different audiences on different platforms and meeting your audiences where they are, which I think is really important as well. So then moving on, the next stage in that process then is around, you know, what is your content strategy? And that really kind of comes to, like, it's at the crux of a lot of this stuff, because digital social media is very visual, you know, so we need to really be like thinking through what type of content do we need in order to be able to reach these audiences on these platforms in order to meet these aims and objectives that we have set, you know. And like when it comes to content on social media, audiences are looking to either be, you know, they're like engaged but like informed or entertained, you know, so trying to keep those kind of like things in mind. And for much of the work that you guys are doing, I think it is more maybe in the informed side of things, you know, so it's all about trying to like add value into the conversation online. And that's always kind of like what I'm trying, like what I come back to is like, where are we adding value? Are we adding value? So trying to do that within your content. And we'll look at some examples of that as well next. So the next stage in the process then is around how will you engage your audiences, and thinking back to when we were looking at the results from the global tech survey, and that thing around inspiring people to take action. This is where this comes in, you know, so it's using all of that engagement. So you've got good, strong content, you've engaged your audiences online. It's then about channeling that into action. So it's making sure that when you are promoting key messages on social media, on your digital platforms, that you include clear calls to action within those communications as well. So you're saying to people, here's what we want you to do, and here's where you need to go and do it. So it might be, you know, sign up to attend this Zoom webinar, and here is the link, you know, just for argument's sake. But trying to include those calls to action as much as possible, and linking those calls to action to those aims and objectives that you've set at the outset as well. Now, you know, you're not always going to have like a call to action include, but just making sure that where appropriate, where relevant, that you are doing it. Because, you know, if you do put up like a video on Facebook and it does really well and it's getting lots of engagement, and then there's no call to action, you're missing out on that opportunity of getting people further involved and bringing them further in the process. So just trying to have that. And then also thinking about different ways that people will want to get involved, you know. So some people are going to be kind of like really interested in everything that you're doing, and, you know, they're going to want to attend your webinars and all that. So having those calls to action for them. But then some people less so. They might be just kind of like starting in the process, and so they might want to sign up to a newsletter, for example, you know. So having like thinking about where people might be at along that kind of like spectrum, and having different ways for them to get involved, I think would be really important as well. And then also, like, what does success look like? So this is again around kind of like measuring and really tracking on that return on investment, like really, really important as well, you know. So being able to set kind of goals at the outset, and then measure your performance as you're ongoing, you know, and looking and listening to what's working well, you know, what type of content is actually engaging our audiences, and trying to do a little bit more of that, or what's not working, you know. Okay, whenever we're sharing articles from the media, you know, that's not really getting good engagement, so maybe trying to tweak that approach. And it's important for a number of reasons. One, because I think there is great learning in that, you know, as to what works, but also for the algorithms as well, you know. So on social media, if we're kind of like relying on like organic reach to get in front of new audiences, you know, we need to take the algorithm into consideration. So on Facebook, for example, if you're consistently posting content that does get good engagement, Facebook will say, oh, okay, whenever Global Heart Hub posts this type of content, it does well. Therefore, we're going to push it higher up in people's Facebook news feeds. Okay. On the flip side, if you're putting out content regularly that doesn't get good engagement, Facebook will say, okay, whenever they put out this type of stuff, it doesn't actually do that well. People don't find it relevant. They down rank it in the algorithm then as well. So it's important to listen to it for that reason as well, you know. But certainly I think like really good learning as well. So compare it to, so if you take out an ad in a local paper, for example, you know, or you get an op-ed place or something like that, you don't necessarily know how many people read that piece or saw that ad. But if you put up a video on Facebook, you know exactly how many people that video reached. If there's a link to your website, you know how many people clicked from that video over to your website. And then also, like, you know, you'll get information as to how long they watched the video for. So if it's a 2-minute video, you'll see like when people started to drop off, how many people watched 25%, how many people watched 50%, 75%. So, you know, you're able to really kind of like take a lot of learning from this. And the last thing I'll say on that as well is, like, you know, also trying to understand what counts as meaningful engagements for your advocacy work as well. So trying to come up with targets that are linked to your aims and your objectives. So if I'm just going to take this example of this webinar again, for example, you're trying to use social media to drive the registration for this, okay? So you might set like a target for that. And then all of your social media posts, you're looking at the analytics and you're seeing how many clicks did the social media post generate to the registration page to sign up for this webinar. You know, so just being actually like drilling down into the analytics and trying to set some goals around that. Okay. So out of these, I'm just going to highlight again the content strategy piece, because I do think that that's really important, and hopefully we'll kind of like illustrate kind of what I'm trying to get at here with a couple of examples. You know, so and as I was saying, you know, audiences are looking for that added value and that informative kind of content as well. So just kind of like a couple of examples to maybe kind of like help illustrate that. So the top one there is every heart counts. This is from the CDC. You know, so just a couple of stats and what you're trying to do here. So this might be example, you know, you produce a report or you do a piece of research. And that report is hosted on your website, okay? So rather than just putting up a social media post saying, oh, we're after producing this research, go to our website to read it, you know, you're actually pulling out some key figures, key stats, putting it into an engaging piece of content that's going to stand out on social media and engage people a lot more than just a link to the website. Okay, so it's about utilizing the kind of the key messages on the content that you have and repackaging it in appropriate formats for your different digital platforms. Okay, and so that one on the top there, yeah, it's from the CDC, and the one on the bottom is from the WHO. And this is an example from, it was like heart.org. But again, like, you know, so thinking of things like, you know, 7 ways to do this, so, you know, those kinds of engaging kind of like lists and, you know, just that informative content, I think will really stand out on your social media feeds and engage your audiences. And also, like, I included this as well because of that call to action at the end there. So, you know, take charge of your heart, start today, here's the link. So that's what I mean, you know, being very explicit as to what you want people to do, where they need to go in order to be able to do that as well. I'm just wondering, do we want to take any questions at this stage on any of that before we get into the case study, or will we leave it all to the end?
I was going to suggest you leave it till the end,
Yeah.
Craig, if you have, let's see, maybe another 5-10 minutes. Is that
no problem? I'll zoom ahead then.
We'll take some questions then, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect.
Thanks.
Perfect. Yeah, also, I just wanted to give a little bit of a case study from the marriage equality referendum in Ireland as well. So just taking those kind of like 7 steps and looking at that kind of in practice as well, okay? So yeah, as I mentioned, like, Ireland became the first country in the world to introduce marriage equality by a vote of the people in May 2015. So this was kind of a very large advocacy, public awareness campaign, you know, and a lot of kind of like planning and resourcing went into this. We did a lot of research leading up to the referendum, you know, which suggested to us that we had like a core 20% support base. They were voting yes. No argument was going to change their mind. So we had them kind of like locked in. On the flip side, there was a 20% no vote. They were voting no yes argument was going to change their mind. So we kind of made a decision at the outset, which is like leaving them to one side. And then we're really focused on like that 60% in the movable middle. You know, so they were either soft yeses, soft no's, had some questions, maybe some concerns. And depending on which way they went, they were going to determine the outcome of the vote. And so we saw our job to be to create that space for the people in the middle to be able to voice any concerns, ask any questions that they had. Our job was to answer those questions, allay those concerns, and ultimately bring them over to the yes side. So that was like our main focus. But then also not forgetting that really important 20% core support yes, and mobilizing and motivating them to become advocates and to go and talk to their friends, their families, their communities, give them the confidence to be able to do that and talk about why they were voting yes in May 2015. So thinking about then kind of like that the framing and the messaging, or how did we kind of like go and achieve that? So we had an overarching kind of campaign frame that was one of, you know, constitutional equality. For this was an opportunity. This was the first time to treat all of our citizens as equals in front of the eyes of the Constitution. So it's very much spying into this kind of sense of us. But rooted very much within kind of like that frame. It was like, this was a values-driven campaign, you know. So what we were saying is like as Irish people, we are fair, we are decent, we are generous, and the fair, the decent, the generous thing to do is to vote yes in May, you know. And I think a lot of people, like, that resonated with a lot of people. I think it was one of our biggest successes, because people even say to this day, you know, oh, it became so much more than just about gay marriage. It became about the type of country we are, the type of society we are, you know, and the type of people we are. So I think then that was really as a result of that values campaign. Maintaining or creating and maintaining a positive tone throughout, again, was really, really important in order to be able to engage that group in the middle. And then how we were speaking to them. So what were our messages? And as important, if not more important, who were our messengers as well, you know? So trying to have as many different people involved. So what did that look like? You know, we had some like high profile people, you know, it involves like, so a couple of examples here. Daniel O'Donnell, kind of famous country western singer from the west of Ireland. You know, so Daniel O'Donnell is going to speak to kind of middle-aged, older women across Ireland in ways that we were never going to be able to do. So that's what I mean here about just the messengers being really, really important. Also, that like our former president, Mary McAleese, also included in this as well. And this is some of our best performing content across the whole campaign. I think, you know, due to just how well respected they are, but also maybe a little bit of an unexpected voice in the debate as well. So it traveled much further. And having these kind of like high profile kind of like names was brilliant. But it's not always all about them, you know, and it's about everyday people in their communities talking to people like them as well. So this example on the top is, this is a video actually as part of the Vote With Us campaign. This featured a couple in County Louth, which is just north of Dublin. It's near the border between the North and the Republic of Ireland. So they made this video and they were talking about, you know, the love that they've experienced over the last 50 years. They want the same for their son. They talked about being involved in the civil rights struggle in the North. Now it's time to do the same in the South. You know, they talked about being practicing Catholics, you know, but they know that their ever-loving God knows that this is the right thing to do. And it was just absolutely so effective in speaking to so many older people and couples like them in towns and villages right across the country. So powerful. And they became like little stars in their own right as a result of this as well. And similarly, a lot of people remember, so the example I have on the bottom there is was called a Ring Your Granny. So this was a campaign started by a group of students in Trinity College in Dublin. So there was that perception that older people were maybe a little bit more conservative and less likely to vote yes. So this video was to try and address that. And so we had these students making a video of them calling up their grandparents and asking them how they were going to vote. And again, really, really lovely. I think it really captured hearts and minds, because these young people were very nervous to have these conversations, but then as soon as they did, you know, their grandparents and their loved ones were like, of course we're voting yes, this is for you, this is for future generations. And it was just really, really lovely. And that whole kind of like values-based messaging again kind of coming in there. And I think what was really brilliant about this, was that it inspired action, you know, so it inspired other people all across the country. They didn't have to make their own videos, but it just inspired them to pick up the phone and have those conversations with their loved ones, you know, and there's just so much power in that as well. So then just on like the kind of the content, again, you know, like that kind of informative content, you know, so a big, and matching it to your aims and your objectives. So a big objective for us was trying to get as many kind of like new, younger voters onto the register, because a lot of them would have been first-time voters. So again, it was like kind of creating graphics, infographics for social media, saying, yeah, get onto the register, here's how you do so. You know, so pushing this regularly and trying to drive those voter registration efforts. And voter registration efforts were also taking place offline as well, but we were using online also to drive it. Turning a negative into a positive as well. I think, you know, really, really important, trying to harness kind of like energy. So in political campaigns in Ireland, posters going up on lampposts around the country is just a common feature of those campaigns. And it was the same during this one. But the no posters, the no sides posters went up a good 7 to 10 days before the yes posters. And it caused a lot of anger and frustration amongst the yes voters. And there was a lot of kind of like pent up kind of frustration on social media. People were asking where were the yes posters and giving out about the no posters. So as a campaign, we kind of came together and we're like, okay, how are we going to respond to this? And, you know, we needed funds as well. So we were saying, we started pumping social media with messages saying, you know, don't get angry, don't get frustrated, donate to the campaign. We need money for posters. And, you know, and just kept pushing that and trying to really harness that frustration, that energy, and direct it into a positive way for the campaign. And we saw a huge spike in donations that first kind of like 24 hours after the no posters went up. Yeah, so also trying to really facilitate that offline action. We set out to have like one local Yes Equality group across the country, but we actually grew to like a network of over 60 in small towns and villages across Ireland. And a lot of those, you know, were using social media to establish themselves. So Yes Equality Cork, setting up a Facebook page, people joining that, and then they calling a meeting, you know, so organizing and mobilizing themselves that way. And then keeping up a very active presence throughout as well. So, you know, and making it as easy as possible for people to participate and to take that offline action. So here's an example from Yes Equality Cork, who used to tweet every week saying, you know, because canvassing was so important during the campaign, going out, knocking on the doors every evening, asking people to vote. That's what won it. But Yes Equality Cork used to tweet out a schedule every week saying, here's when we're going canvassing, we're meeting at this place at this time, come join us. You know, so making it very easy for people to get involved and to participate. So to really to drive that action as well. Just quickly going to finish up now. Another thing which can be very useful for groups like yourselves as well is to try and like crowdsource kind of skills from within your engaged group of supporters as well. So like, when it came to the final couple of weeks of the campaign, we switched all of our efforts to getting the vote out. And you know, we had lots of kind of goodwill, people wanting to help us create visual assets and stuff for the campaign. So we put out a message asking people, hey, look, you know, if you want to help us kind of create some content for our digital platforms around this idea of making a plan to vote. And then we got loads of kind of content in then that we could like reshare on our social media, you know, so you might have people within your networks who are good at graphic design or simple video editing, who may be able to give you a hand. And there's a lot of research done around this, around kind of like millennial giving. And, you know, there's suggestions that like people are like less likely to, or, you know, less inclined to go out and shake buckets in the way they used to, but they want to utilize their skills in a way that is going to help different causes. So are there ways that you can kind of tap into that? And just to conclude then, you know, I wanted to make reference to that the hashtag home to vote, because this is definitely the one thing that people remember from the campaign. As Irish people, we're known for being all over the world, and 72 hours before voting day in May 2015, Irish people from every corner of the world started to travel home just to vote. I think that ties into that whole, you know, what kind of country do we want to live in, and what type of society do we want to be a part of? And Irish people were coming home to play a part in that, you know, so from all across Europe, America. I had a friend who came from Australia just to vote, you know, and I think that it really kind of summed up the type of campaign that we set out to run. With that, I will finish up.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Craig. And I think what's certainly from an Irish perspective, what's interesting about your presentation is that, you know, of all the things that have happened in Irish society, irrespective of your political or religious persuasion, objectively Ireland was always traditionally a very conservative country, and here was a major change taking place. So it's a very interesting campaign to show, I guess, how social media played its part. So we have a few minutes for questions. If I can start with, you made reference there to, you know, targeting your platforms, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and so forth. Is it too general an assumption to assume that you can rank order the platforms? In other words, that you could say to a group like you have on the line here, your best platform really is ranking them. Number one should be Twitter, number two should be Facebook. Or is it specific to each campaign and the demographic you're trying to reach?
Yeah, it is more specific to say that the who you are trying to reach and what your aims and your objectives are. And that really would kind of like influence, or should kind of influence where you should be prioritizing at least your resources. But I think, you know, it is okay to rank them based on that, you know, especially if we do have limited resources, you know. So if you are like, if you're definitely like focused on engaging with elected representatives, with media, you know, and really kind of like profiling your campaign in that way, well then Twitter is your go-to for that. But if it's just kind of like a broader public awareness and you're trying to reach as many kind of like wide demographics as possible, Facebook is definitely, you know, your go-to for that. It's still the largest in terms of overall reach amongst demographics. It's not growing at the same rate that it once was. It's kind of remaining a little bit stagnant, but it still is the biggest player in the game. And then Instagram, definitely for younger audiences, but that is changing now, you know, like older demographics are moving to Instagram as well. Whereas Facebook is kind of remaining a bit stagnant, Instagram is booming. So in terms of, say, growth, if you're looking to like grow your presence on these platforms, you probably have more scope or more opportunity to do that on LinkedIn and Twitter to more of an extent than on Facebook.
And can I ask you, how important is it on whichever platform you're on that you have a good following at the outset? So in other words, if I want to, or as an organization, I want to run a campaign, but I only have a couple of hundred followers, am I immediately disadvantaged in terms of the success because I don't have enough followers? Is it about how many followers you have?
No, you're not immediately at a disadvantage. I think what is really important is your content. Like if your content is engaging enough and does add value, it's kind of how far that travels. And that will influence kind of like how many audiences you do reach, you know? So what I would say is it's about kind of like, first of all, yeah, definitely making sure that your content is really relevant, engaging, informative. And then it's like utilizing all of your networks. So if you're working with different organizations, any supporters that you have, it's about coordination. So lining all of them up and saying, you know, we're launching this campaign on this date. Here's some suggested messaging for your social media platforms. We're going to be putting out this content, these infographics, giving them all of those tools to be able to push and promote it. I think those are the key things. And then also, if you are starting from a lower base, the other thing that I would say is that advertising on social media can actually be very effective as well. For two reasons. One, I think it's very cost effective. Like small amounts of money on social media ads can actually go a long way. Because, and this is number two, is because it's very effective at targeting. So, you know, you can, like on Facebook is definitely the most sophisticated for being able to target audiences. But you could say, I want to reach people in this area and 50 kilometers surrounding, aged between 20 and 35, who are interested in X, Y, and Z. And then Facebook will create an audience based on your targeting criteria. And then you say, and they'll tell you approximately how big that audience is. And then you say, okay, I have a budget of €250 to spend on this. So they will say, okay, well, for €250, based on the targeting that you've set, you will reach X amount of people per day. And then depending on what you set your objective to be, it'll be like, and you'll get Y number of clicks per day, approximately, you know, and they will adjust that depending on how much or how little you want to spend as well. So small amounts can go a long way, and it's very effective because of targeting as well.
Interestingly, just as an aside, Global Hub is currently running a campaign. The hashtag is Just Go. And the basic message is if you have symptoms indicative of a cardiac or stroke emergency, don't delay, go to hospital. And we seem to have breached the advertising rules on Twitter. And I think there's also, I think Del might be on the call. She can message me with an update. There's also some sort of rules or some rules on Facebook as well, where they have set criteria that you can't, you know, they're banning certain messaging. So messaging around health symptoms is one, for example. So that's something it needs to be considered, I suppose, you know. So
sorry, on Twitter, well, Twitter have banned all political and social issue ads. So if kind of like what you're promoting is kind of falls into that social issue category, you're probably not going to get through Twitter's filters. Yeah. Then on Facebook, they don't have the same rules, but they have transparency measures. So if you are promoting political or social issue ads, you just have to go through a couple of extra steps, and more information is available to people as to how much has been spent on the ads, who is paying for the ads, and that's all kind of as a result of kind of like the 2016 US presidential election. Yes. and Brexit and all of the issues that arose from that.
Yeah. In your campaign there, it's quite obvious that the actual creative content was very good, very powerful, very clever messaging. I guess that is an expense. It doesn't just, you have an asset that in your own sort of team that's very good creatively, or you have to spend money on it. Is that right?
Well, to be honest, it's becoming a lot more accessible to be able to kind of like create these resources like in-house with little kind of like, say, skills or resources available. There's loads of tools out there now. So even like, you know, those examples that I gave from like the CDC or the World Health Organization, like, you know, we can actually kind of create those ourselves now. So, you know, if I had more time, I'd take you through kind of like different tools for that. Yeah. But like the one that I will kind of like tell people to go check out, and some of you may have heard of it already, is Canva. It's really, really good. It's basically like a graphic design tool for people who are not graphic designers. So Canva. And there is a free version or a premium version, but also if you are a registered nonprofit, they will give you access to the premium version for free. Just Google Canva for nonprofits, and there's a form that you fill out, but there's a very quick turnaround time, and then you'll get access to the full platform for free. And what's really good about Canva is it already has everything, like the template sized for you. So if you're looking for a Twitter post or a Facebook event cover or whatever it is, they're already sized there. And you can upload your own logos, your own fonts, use your own brand colors. It's very, very user friendly as well.
Excellent. That's a good tip if people haven't been familiar with that. Some of the questions, Craig, any tips on what makes a good hashtag?
Yeah, so okay, a couple of things on hashtags. So one is only use them selectively, you know, so when it's kind of like relevant and appropriate. You don't want to be kind of like including too many hashtags in, say, like the one tweet or the one Instagram post, because it can start to look a little bit kind of like messy. So just kind of like using them where it is relevant, you know. So, and if it's already kind of like out there in the public domain, you know, if there is discussions ongoing on Twitter and you're adding into that conversation, like leverage those opportunities to use existing hashtags to get in front of new audiences. But if you are creating your own one for your own campaign, so Neil, like you just mentioned there, the Just Go. So that sounds like a good one, you know, trying to keep it relatively short. Also, you know, it's very difficult, but like short, catchy, and then ideally, you know, it is bespoke or it is unique to your campaign. And it might be a case that it's kind of fully like bespoke, but it mightn't have been used in the last kind of couple of years, and then you might be safe. But definitely worth looking into the hashtag and making sure that it hasn't been used for something that's completely kind of in a different direction from what you're talking about as well.
Yeah. Fernanda has 2 questions all the way from Brazil. Have you experience of creating content for TikTok to engage young people? And what about LinkedIn to reach possible fundraising and key opinion leaders in business? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so TikTok, I suppose, is the new platform where all the young kids are at. And it's certainly kind of like you know, establishing its presence among the other big players in the game. I suppose kind of like, say, for organizations or for campaigns, kind of like using it, it's still relatively new as to kind of like how best to use that most effectively. But there is a really good example that I've seen kind of like in the Irish context anyway, from the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre. So they actually used TikTok for a recent campaign they ran around consent. So they partnered with like 20 of the most kind of like influential young TikTokers to kind of create content for their audiences, all on the topic of consent. And I think it was really, really brilliant, because what the Rape Crisis Centre done was they invited all of the TikTokers to these kind of like workshops where they fully informed them on all of the messaging and all the campaign, and then like kind of sent them away for these TikTokers to create their own content for their audiences. So in a way that it was going to still be like authentic for them and for their followers. So they weren't simply kind of, say, taking Dublin Rape Crisis Centre messaging and pushing it out to their platforms. They were actually absorbing the messaging and creating their own content in that kind of like TikTok style and format, you know, in order to kind of have impact. And it was really, really impactful. It resulted in lots and lots of kind of like earned media coverage for the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre as well. So it was really, really effective. So that's kind of like one that's certainly worth checking out. Just on LinkedIn then, LinkedIn is also very effective, like if you know, reaching kind of like those decision makers as well. LinkedIn is having a little bit of a moment as well, you know, so whereas I suppose historically it was seen mostly as like just a job posting site. That's changing now, and people are using it a lot more as a social network, but they're definitely looking for that value added content. So thinking about like thought leadership and those kind of pieces, that tends to work really well on LinkedIn. So it's maybe like looking at kind of like, those even within your own campaigns, within your own organizations, who are those kind of people who are experts on cardiovascular disease, on diabetes, and getting them to write a LinkedIn article, things like that, that would work really well on getting your message across on that platform.
Craig, we've got to keep the time or we'll never get people to join us again. Can I say that was really, really very good, a very good presentation, very helpful, very practical tips there. And again, lots of questions had come in advance, which we don't have time for, which again goes back to the point as to why we were going to have this over 2 days originally, but I definitely intend to engage with you again in the very near future if I can, because there's obviously a lot of interest in this topic. So I'm going to conclude now by firstly thanking Avril, Gay and Craig for giving up their time today. I certainly have found it very helpful, very beneficial, and I hope that all of you've got something out of today. I want to thank our sponsors again. Our sponsors are with us for the whole series of advocacy training, which will culminate hopefully in the face-to-face event, which was postponed. So we're working up towards that. And indeed, one of the aspirations of the Hub is to create an academy in this area. So stay tuned and stay involved. I want to thank my colleagues, Maeve, Maureen, and indeed Adele more recently. You guys have put this together, and thank you for doing that. It's new to all of us, and I think by any standard you did a great job. We had a great attendance throughout the day, so that's fantastic. I know I was joined with some of my colleagues on the board of Global Hub, Ellen and Susan. Thank you guys for joining in. I know that it was at a different time of the day for you at the other side of the world, so thank you for being with us today. I hope you found this to be beneficial in terms of useful tips. I hope that you found it inspirational, motivational. I certainly did, and I've taken a lot from today. We will drop you a mail in the next few days just to get your feedback in a very, very quick survey, which we will use to guide us in future events like this. So I would ask you, I know you're probably inundated with these type of things, but just to take the few minutes to fill out that survey and give us some feedback. And as critical as you need to be, absolutely, this is how you learn. And there are some questions about sharing presentations. I'm delighted to say that 3 speakers today have agreed to share their presentations. So on that mail to you, we'll let you know about a link if you want to go back and revisit those. That concludes it for today. Really great to have you all with us. Have a pleasant rest of day or evening or whatever time it is in your zone, and keep in touch, and we'll keep you posted of our next advocacy event. Take care. Slán a bhaile.